Oh, hey there! Let's now finish the 𝗦𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗬 website in this section by tying up some loose ends that we had left open in this project. So we still need to add some JavaScript to make scrolling and to make the mobile navigation work. We need to compress our images for better performance, and we also need to just add some other final finishing touches. So that's what we're gonna do in this section, and then in the very end we will also finally launch our project to the internet for everyone to see it. So over the next few lectures we are going to add a couple of dynamic effects to our page. So things like making our mobile navigation work and also some scrolling animations, for example. And we will do all of that using JavaScript. And so I think that right now it is a good idea to give you a very, very short and basic introduction to JavaScript, which is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the course, basically the programming language of the web. All right, and as always, we are starting a new section, and so I will copy and then paste that here. So duplicating this folder, and this one I'm going to call it 𝗦𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗬 optimizations, because in this section we will basically do some optimizations before we then launch our page to the internet. So section number 9, and therefore folder number 9 here as well. And as always, you of course don't have to create this new folder, so you can simply work on the folder that you have been using. But what you need to do is to get to your starter files, and then here in the starter folder, select this one here, and then copy the script. So this file here called script.js, copy that, and then paste that into your current project folder. So right here. And actually, let's create a folder here, which I'm going to call JS, which stands for JavaScript. And so all our scripts will go into this folder. So here we already have this starter script because some of the code is already written. All right. And this one is typically called script.js, where JS stands again for the extension of JavaScript. Okay. And so I will take that folder and push it here onto this icon. And let's click on Go Live. And so with that, here, this should be back to working. Now we can go out of this mode here by clicking again toggle device bar. And so we are back to normal here. Okay, so we have our HTML, of course, and our JavaScript. And for now, we will not need the CSS files. So let's just close this. And now we will work a little bit here in this file. Now, actually, before doing that, we need to connect this script here, so this JavaScript file, with our index.html. So JavaScript can be written in many different places. So now it's time to finally make the mobile navigation work. And let's start by remembering how the mobile navigation actually works. So this one we don't need for now. So it's here at the queries. All right, let's actually open this here on another side. And the same with the script. Removing some space there. And now down here, I think it was in this media query where we have the mobile navigation. Right. And so that mobile navigation is displayed whenever the header has this nav open class. Remember that? So let me copy this. And then here we need to go back to our responsive view, basically. So double clicking on inspect, and now the header. So I'm gonna paste now this class name, hit enter, and then there is our navigation. And then when we want to close the navigation, we want to remove the class. All right. And so now we will use JavaScript to basically do this automatically whenever this button here is clicked. All right. And that's actually not that hard. So let's add some comment here. So set current year. And make mobile navigation work. Let me already paste that here so that I can now copy paste this comment just to give this file some easier to understand structure. Okay, and so just like before, let's start by selecting the elements that are relevant here. So in our HTML, let's move up here. So to the navigation. So right here. So when do we want a certain action to happen? So in this case, adding this class here. So we always need to start by thinking about that. So where we actually need to click in order for something to happen. And in this case, that is this button right here. Right? So let's grab this class name here and then select that. And again, creating a new variable for that. So let's call it button for navigation, and then document.querySelector, and then again our selector between these quotes. And it doesn't matter if single quotes or double quotes. So the dot as always, and yeah. So that is our button here. And the lines always need to end here with the semicolon, but I haven't been writing that because Prettier, which is the extension that formats our HTML code and our CSS, does also format JavaScript. All right. So this is one of our HTML elements that is relevant. And the second one is the header, right? Because that is where we will want to add this class. And so let's go select that one as well. So this one has the class of header. So header, let's again actually call this L and this one as well, just to follow that same convention. So document.querySelector, and then with the header class. Okay. And now we do just as we did before right here, using this function called addEventListener. So we want to listen for the click event now on this button, right? So button navl.addEventListener, and then click. And there are, of course, other events than clicking, for example, hovering or typing some key on the keyboard or something like that. Okay. And then the second part here of this addEventListener function is that we pass in our own function. And so remember that here now goes the code that we actually want to execute whenever this click event happens on the button. So what is that action that we want to take? Well, we basically want to add this class here to the header when it is not there. But if it is already there, then we want to remove that. And in JavaScript, we can do that very easily with just one line of code. So we take our header, and then since we want to work with classes, there is something called the class list property. So class list, then dot again. And here from the VS Code suggestions, you can see that we can use this one here to add classes. We can use this one here to remove classes. But what we want to do actually is toggle, which is kind of adding and removing all at the same time. So toggle, and here now we're going to use that nav open class. And that's it. That's actually all we need. So what toggle will do is it will look at this element here, and if it does have this 𝗦𝗣𝗜𝗖𝗬 class, it will then not add it. So if it's already there, it will remove it, but if it's not there, then it will add it. Okay? And here, make sure to really just write the name of the class, but without the dot. So not like this, but really just the name of the class. Okay? And that's actually it. So let's check that. And clicking here, and indeed, you see that now here is 𝗦𝗣𝗜𝗖𝗞. Beautiful. Now, I'm just seeing that the focus effect is here behind, so we need to fix that a little bit, but the functionality here is already working. So, beautiful, really, really nice. With just a couple of lines of JavaScript, we just made this happen. So we can click here as many times as we want, and it will always just work. But now, what I was mentioning about the focus states is that maybe you can very faintly see it here, so that orange border here in the background. And so the problem here is that we need to actually make sure that this button here is always on top of this navigation right here. So of this element with the white background. So let's do that. And remember that exactly for that purpose, we have the 𝗤index property. So let's see where that is. Right here. So let's just set some very high value here. 𝗤index, let's say 1000. So it doesn't really matter here. Sometimes we even use something like this just to show that we want to really use some really, really high value here. So let's actually keep that here. So that's kind of a convention that many people do. And yeah, and so there's no problem of us also using that. But anyway, now you see that the focus state always stays on top, which means that this button here is now, in fact, also on top of all of this here. Now, okay, and just like this, we made it work, and so mission accomplished. In this lecture, we're going to use JavaScript to implement some nice animated scrolling. Now, before we can actually animate some scrolling effects, we first need to implement the scrolling in the first place in HTML. So right now, for example, if we click, and let's turn this off. So if we click, for example, here on one of these links, then it will lead nowhere. So it leads to this URL, which has this right here, right? Because basically we just made it an empty link. And so what we want, of course, to happen is that when we click here, it moves to the meals section, and here it moves to the how it works section, and so on and so forth. And we can actually do that just using HTML. It will then not have the animated scroll, but it will still work. So let me show you how we can do that. And I will first do it just with one of these buttons here. So on this button here, when we click it, we want it to move to the call to action section, right? Because that is where we can start eating well. So let me show you how we can do that. So let's go to that section here at the very end. So this one here. And now here we need to add an ID. So we're back to using IDs, but this time not to select the element in the CSS, but really to give this element here a unique name. So let's call this one CTA. All right. And then let's go back up to our link. So that's this one here. And so now here in the href, we can write that here. So hash CTA. And what we just did here was to create a page anchor. And so this here is what the anchor is. So again, CTA is the ID of the element. And if we then use that as the href of an anchor element together with the hash symbol here, then we will move to that place in the page. So let me show that to you. And when we hover over it, you can already see that URL down there in the bottom, right? So now I'm going to click, and there we go. So we just moved automatically here to this section. And you see that the URL indeed changed to our regular URL first, and then slash hash CTA. So if we remove this, then we will go back up, right? And so now we can do that basically on all our sections and on all our links. So this one here doesn't really need it because it's just the first section in the page, and we also don't want any link leading there. And the same with the featured section. So there's no link on the page that should end up here in this section, so no need for that. And here I'm simply calling them like a shorter name, not again section how, but just how. And of course any name would work here, but I'm just doing it like this here. So meals. Then the next one is the testimonials, which we also want. So just copying that. Then next we have pricing, which I think is also one of the menu items. And not class, but ID. And the CTA we already have. So I think we're good here, right? That was the last one. And indeed it was. So let's go back up. And now here in our menu, let's create our correct anchors here. So this one is called how. So it will now lead to the element with the ID of how. And never forget this. So the hash. Without this, it will not work at all. Then here, meals, testimonials, pricing, and finally the try for free is CTA. Now, okay. And so now maybe it makes sense why basically an empty link is this one here. It's basically also just an anchor which will simply lead to the top of the page, right? So it's not really, in fact, an empty link. It's simply an anchor for the top of the page. So down here we have that other button here. So this link that is styled as a button where we already set the CTA anchor. And now here for the learn more link, let's simply make this one move to the first section. So that's a very common practice. All right. So I think we should be done. So this one we already tested. This one leads to the how it works section. This one here as well. And let's really test all of them just to make sure. So testimonials, nice. Pricing, and finally CTA. Beautiful. So we have everything now set up in the HTML. And actually, if all you cared about was the Google Chrome browser and also Firefox, then you wouldn't need any JavaScript at all to now animate these scrollings. So let me show you how we can actually animate scrolling behavior just using CSS. So for that, I'm going to open up our general. And then in body, so in the body selector, we can set scroll behavior to smooth. All right. So just to make sure, let's remove all of this here. And now when I click here, let's see how it moves smoothly to the next section. Well, that didn't really work. So let's go back here. And yeah, actually that scroll behavior property should not be on the body, but on the HTML. All right. So that should fix it. Let's delete this here. And now let's see. And indeed, that was a beautiful, smooth scrolling animation. All right, here the same. And it will, of course, work for all of them. So that's really nice, except for that it doesn't work on the current version of Safari. So if I copy this and open up Safari, let's remove this part here, then you see that as I click here, we still have this kind of harsh jump instead of a nice and smooth animation, right? Now the problem with this is that Safari is in fact the only browser that is available on the iPhone and iPad. So even Google Chrome on these devices actually uses Safari as the rendering engine. And so on all these devices, so on all iPhones out there, it will not work. So you will always then have simply this. And this is really not good, especially for a big page like this one, where if we click here and then it doesn't move there very smoothly, it seems like this is an entirely new page, right? So this hard jump doesn't really show that we are moving there. While when we click here, so if we click on meals here, then we can nicely see that we're still on the same page and that it simply moved there. So the animation here is not really just to make it beautiful, but also to show the user what is going on, right? And so we should fix this unless you are like watching this maybe in like 2024 or 25. Then you might be okay, and all the latest versions of Safari might already have this. But at this point, we should now write some JavaScript to implement this functionality for all browsers. Okay, so let's move back here and turn this off. Does not work on Safari and also not on Microsoft Edge. So maybe right now it does, I'm not sure, because they're using the same engine as Google Chrome, but some time ago it also didn't work there. And yeah, again, the best thing to do is to just write some JavaScript here to fix that. And that will not be the only problem we have with Safari. So in the next lecture or the one after that, here you see that all this code is also for fixing something in Safari. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and just work here on the smooth scrolling animation. Okay, now this one will be a little bit more complex than the one that we did before, but I will just explain everything step by step, and then the code at least should make sense. Even though, as I said before, I will of course not expect you to be able to write this sort of code after just watching these few lectures here. For that, you would have to take probably an entire JavaScript course. But anyway, let's now select all the links on the page, basically. So let's say all links. So document query selector, and now it is actually query selector all. So when we want more than just element, we need to do this. And now we can simply use the A selector, right? And so that will then select only the links. And to make it even better, we can also use the link pseudo class here. So just like this. And so then just like in CSS, this will only select anchor elements which actually have the href property. So again, just like in CSS, right? Now just to see, let's take a look at this in the console. All right, so let's inspect this back here. And so you see now we get this thing here, which is called a node list. And then you see that here we have all of these anchor elements, right? Now next, we need to add an event listener to each of these links, just like we did here before. So in the exact same way, because now again, we want to listen for a click event. So we want something to happen whenever the user clicks on one of these anchors. All right. So all links, but now we cannot just write add event listener like this, because as we just saw, the all links are multiple elements. And so we need to add the add event listener to each of them individually. So we can write for each. Then here we need to, just like before, write a function. And then here we need to specify basically that each of these elements in the all links is a link. And this name here could of course be anything we wanted, could be just L, but I like to call it here link in this case. And so now here is where we have basically the individual link, and then we can add event listener here like before. There would actually be a cleaner way of doing this called event delegation, but let's not go into that right here. So just like before, here we specify a function, and here we did actually give this a name again, so this so-called parameter in this function, and this E here stands for event, because we actually do have access to the event that happens. So let me show that to you also in the console. Okay, and so now the only thing that will happen is that whenever we click on one of the links, we will get the event object logged to the console. So let's try this one here. And indeed, we get a mouse event. So here we have then all this kind of data here, which we don't really need. I just wanted to show you that we do get access to that event, and it has a bunch of data on it. Now this is important here because as you see that the page actually moved here, right? Because of course that is the default behavior of the anchor. Okay, but now we actually need to turn that default behavior off so that we can implement our own. So prevent default. And so now if we try that again, so coming up here, so if I now click, then nothing should happen. And indeed, it did not. All right. And by the way, if you're not really interested in the code that I'm writing here, you can just skip this video and simply take the code here from the final file of this section. All right. You don't have to go through this if you're not interested in JavaScript. Okay. But if you are interested, then let's keep going here. And the first thing I'm going to do is to now read basically the href attribute out of the link that was clicked. Because we will then use that href to actually scroll to the corresponding section. So that is link.get attribute with the name of href. And again, let's log that to the console. So href. All right. And here, again, I could have given it any name, but here not. So here, the name of the attribute that we want to get from each link is really called href. So really this here, for example, right? So the name is href. And so here we are reading that attribute. So let's see. When I click here, then we get CTA. And here we should get how, right? Because, well, that's where we set the anchor to. So we can see that down there also. Okay. And now we actually have everything to implement our scrolling functionality. And let's start with the one that scrolls back to the top. So scroll back to top. And so those are these ones here. So this link, for example, which has just the hash, and also like the one here in the footer. So this one is also just hash, right? And so this one and the one at the top, we want them to scroll back to the top. So we can say if the href is equal to just this, so what we just saw in the browser, then the window should scroll to, so you see that all of this reads kind of like English. Now here we specified this object of options, and we say the top should be 0 pixels and the behavior should be smooth. All right, and that's it actually. So at least for this type of link. So if I click this now, then it moves back smoothly to the top. And the same here. And it is the top because we set it here to 0. So we could have set it like to 20, and then it would move like to 20 pixels off the page. You saw that? So not really to the top, but of course we want it to be 0 here. Now the thing is that not even this here does work by default in Safari, but there is a fix for that. So we can just include this line of code here in our HTML. So this is what we call a polyfill, which is basically a JavaScript library which implements this functionality for Safari. So let's copy this. So go ahead and select this text here and then copy it. And then we need to also add that here as a script, just like we did here with these IN icons. So this was an external script that was loaded from somewhere else. And this was basically an internal script that is loaded from our own page. And now we will add this other script that I just mentioned. So also defer, then source, and then what we copied before. All right, give it a save. And so, yeah, let's copy this here now and try it out in Safari. Well, actually we don't. Well, we can just come here back to the top, and then let's move down and click on this one. And whoa, what's happening there? Well, that was just something strange from before. But what matters here is that now it did scroll smoothly to the top. All right. Now, of course, these others do not work yet because, well, we didn't implement them yet. So we only, yeah, right here actually. So we only implemented here the smoothing scrolling for when the href is exactly this one here, right? But then we also have some other situations. So basically where the href is not just that. So href is different than just this. And at the same time, href starts with that. Okay. Now here we could also have said or tested for the situation in which href starts with this one and is longer than just one character. But, well, that's really the same here. Okay. And now this here works a little bit different. So for now, let's again just log it to the console so I can then show you the technique that we're going to use here. So in this case, log href to the console. Okay, let's test that here. And so when we click here, it now should log that to the console. And actually that happened twice because we still have this part from before. But let's go back. So if we click here, it appears once. And so that is because it starts with the hash, but it is not just that. And so if we click here, then nothing appears in the console. All right, so basically because it does not pass this testing condition here. All right, but anyway, what matters is that this string here, so this text looks somehow like a selector for an ID, right? So remember how the hash is the ID selector in CSS, right? And we can very easily check that by copying this. And then let's say just here, this is just for testing. Let's say background blue, right? And let's see. And indeed, there it is. So this is basically an ID selector because, the hash here selects for elements which have the ID of this here, so of CTA in this case. And so we can use that also to our advantage in the JavaScript. So we can now select the element basically based on that. So we can say document.querySelectorAll, and then here remember that we have to write the selector. And so the selector can simply be the href, right? For example, just like hash CTA. So let's actually again log that to the console. And here, if we have more than one line of code, we need to start a new block with these curly braces. So let's call this the section element that we want to scroll to. And then let's log that to the console. All right. So let's move back up here. So you see that now we got the element here that we want to scroll to. So basically the element that has the ID that is equal to the href of this element right here. So you see it is exactly this element here. And here, if we click on Emils, we of course get this other one. So this one, right? And so now we just need one final piece of the puzzle here, which is to say section element dot scroll into view with the behavior, and you can guess it, of smooth. And that's actually it. So here we could not use the scroll to because we wouldn't know which pixel value from the top we would want to scroll to, right? And so instead we can use this scroll into view function. So let's test that. And yeah, that works beautifully. And on all of them, of course, it should work. And now the final test on Safari. And yes, beautiful. That is really nice, really amazing. So we just implemented smooth scrolling on all browsers. Now just one final thing. So let me switch back here to the mobile view, which is, let's make this a bit bigger actually. So when we switch, so when we turn on our navigation, then let's say we click here. So we smoothly moved here, and so that's exactly as expected. However, if we move back up, then our navigation is still here, of course. And that makes sense, right? I mean, why wouldn't it? There is nothing telling it that it should disappear. However, this is not really practical, right? So whenever we click on one of these links here, basically we will want the navigation to close, right? So we want this here to disappear. Well, that is not all too hard to do. So what we're going to do is this. So moving back here to our HTML, these links that are in the navigation, they all have this class name here, right? And so what we can do is to check if the current link has this class name, and if it does, then we just do this here. So we then just remove the nav open class. Okay, so let's keep adding some comments here to structure our code. So scroll to other links. And finally close mobile navigation. So first off, we need to check if the link has that class of main nav link. And the way we do that is a little bit similar to what we did here. So with this class list. So we can say link.classList, but now instead of toggle, we can say contains. So class list.contains. And so this basically asks the question, is this class, so is main nav link inside of the class list of the link that we just clicked? Okay, and so if it is, then we say basically what we have here. So let's just grab that. And that's it. So again, we basically reach into the list of classes of the link. And so if it contains the main nav link, and so that's how we identify the 5 links that are here in the main nav, then we want to toggle the nav open. So basically removing that nav open if it is on the header. So let's test that again. And we could already see that it was fading out, right? And so it's gone. And so with this, we actually have everything working now beautifully. And just to make sure, let's also test it here. Just making it smaller. All right, pricing. And it's gone now here as well. All right, beautiful. So yet another small effect here completed. So great job. And so let's move on to the next one, where we will create a so-called sticky navigation. So in other words, where we will make this navigation bar here stick on the top throughout the entire page. So making it appear up here. So that's going to be really exciting as well. So hopefully I see you there soon. Hello there, and welcome back to implementing our last effect, which is also the coolest effect of all. And this one is going to be a so-called sticky navigation. So as I had mentioned by the end of the last video, a sticky navigation bar is basically that this navigation here stays on top as we scroll across our entire page. So let's say we are here, or really anywhere on the page, and then we always have our navigation bar here nicely sitting at the top. And once more, I'm pretty sure that you have seen a navigation bar like this many times before, because it is actually really helpful to have that on our page. All right, now let's start by actually creating the style for that, because the JavaScript part is basically only then adding and removing that style. So basically similar to what we did before also with the mobile navigation. All right. So again, I'm going to start by creating a new class, which we will then style to make the navigation sticky. So let's do that in the style.css file, which is where our navigation should be. So here we have the mobile navigation, and now let's add the sticky navigation. So let's call it sticky, which makes sense. And so now there is a new type of value that we can specify for position. So that's something that we hadn't done before. So all we did until this point was position relative and position absolute. But now what we actually want is position fixed. And so this will then fix this element basically in the viewport and will not move it as we scroll. So let's put it at top 0 and bottom 0. And also let's make sure that it will fill the entire viewport. And just so we see it, let's give it a white background color. And let's see what happens. Well, of course, nothing happened because we didn't even add this here anywhere. So let's add this actually to the entire header. Because, of course, the header is the entire part which contains the logo and also the navigation. So right now, all of that, so that entire bar should stay at the top. Right? And there we can already see it. We just reload. And so there it is. So this is kind of already what we are looking for. There is just this problem that we gave these images here a higher z-index value. So let's inspect that. So, well, maybe this entire thing, or maybe just to one of these. Well, in any way, what we need to fix here is the z-index value of this entire header, so of the sticky class, right? So let's again add some really high value here. So z-index, and remember how we used this one here for the button. Now the button, we will want to always stay on top of everything, and so let's just do 999 for this one here. All right. Also, we can use the same background color with some transparency that we used for the mobile navigation. So that's in the queries. So yeah, just this one here. Okay. Give it a save. And beautiful. So that looks really, really nice. But we can see that some space has been lost here before. So that is because the header, so this entire element, has been taken out of the flow, just like with position absolute. So remember that when we position an element with position absolute, it is taken out of the flow of the page, and therefore it is as if it doesn't even exist. And so then the rest of the element fill the remaining space. And so with position fixed, the exact same thing happens. And so now, basically the page starts here at this element. So at the hero section. So you see that it now starts right there at the top. So we will have to fix that at some point, but for now let's actually leave it like this so that you can later see the problem that it causes. Now I also want to add some shadow here, and we also need to make this a bit smaller. So like this, it takes up a little bit too big of the screen, I would say. So we need to make all of this smaller. And actually, I want to give this navigation bar a fixed height. So right here, so let's say 80 pixels, so 8 rem, and then we need to remove the padding from the top and the bottom. So we can say padding top 0 and padding bottom 0 as well. And so with this, the left and right, they simply stay unchanged. Okay, and I will tell you a bit later in the JavaScript part why it is important to have this fixed height. Okay, but for now, let's add that box shadow that I was talking about. And something just very, very subtle. So horizontally, as always, nothing. Then here just 1.2 rem, and then the spread. Let's give it like 3.2. And then here our black color can be something really subtle and even less than this. Let's say just 3%. Okay, that looks really nice. So now it's not too high anymore, I would say, and it still is everything vertically centered here because of Flexbox. But of course, we don't always want this navigation to be sticky like this. So we want this to start basically after this hero section, right? So basically, when we start the content itself, then that's a good time to make it sticky. So basically right here, after we leave the hero section behind. So once that scrolls out of the viewport, right? And so now we can use JavaScript to do exactly that. So basically to add the sticky class as soon as the hero section is no longer visible. All right, so let's do that. Remove it from here. And this is going to be the most tricky part of all that we're going to do here. And so from now on, if you want, you can just skip the rest of this video and simply grab the code from the final files of this section. All right. But again, if you're interested in how this works, then just stick around, just like the sticky navigation. Okay. And the way we will do this is by using a very modern way, which is called the intersection observer. So there would be multiple ways of doing this, but this is the most performant way and also the most modern and the best way, I would say. So intersection observer. And so here we now need to specify two things. First, what we want to happen. So here we will define a function. And then second, some options here. But I will not yet specify these two things. So not the function and not the options, but instead I will start by saving this new intersection observer into a variable. So calling this one here the observer, simply, because now we need to actually do observer.observe. So this sounds very confusing, I know, but just bear with me here. So we just need to write a little bit of code and then things will make more sense. Okay, so this one here could have any other name. Let me call it OBS, maybe as an abbreviation, just to make it less confusing with the OBS. Okay, so here we now need to basically observe some element in the HTML using this observer that we specify here. And so the element that we want to observe is in this case the hero section. So section hero, and this is the section that we want to observe because we will want to make the navigation sticky as soon as this section here moves out of the viewport. So that's what we also said before, right? So basically, as soon as this hero section here moves out of the viewport is when we want to make the navigation sticky. And so that's why that is the element that we're going to observe. All right, so let me select that and create that here first, maybe. So section hero element, and then document. So as always, just selecting it using document.querySelector. Okay, and so this is the element that we want to observe. So section hero. So this was the first part. So using this observer here to observe a certain element, which in this case is this section. And now we need to define the options here. So for that, we have this so-called object here. And the first thing is the root. And the root is basically simply where this element should be appearing or not. So that sounds confusing, but it's really not. So we're just setting it to null here. And what that means is that we will observe this hero section inside of the viewport. So basically as it moves through the viewport. All right. So usually that's always what we do here. But we could also observe some elements basically scrolling inside of something else. But this is most helpful just in the viewport. So basically inside of the entire browser window. Okay. Next, we need to set a threshold. And this one we set at 0. And 0 basically means that this will fire. So basically it means that we will have like an event as soon as 0% of the hero section is inside of the viewport. So again, a little bit confusing, I know. And here we could actually specify multiple values. So it could also be 1. And then we would get the event whenever the hero section is completely inside of the viewport. And so that's why we set null here. So null means the viewport. But again, we want it to be 0 because we want to get an event as soon as the hero section moves out completely of the viewport. So again, that is this event right here. So this situation. Okay. And for now, that is it. And so now we need to actually specify what we want to happen when this is the case. So whenever we have the threshold of 0 in the viewport. Okay, let's move this into another line here, and this one as well. And here we get access to basically something called an array of entries. And there's going to be 1 entries for each threshold value. But here we just have 1, and so we can just say that const end is equal the very first entry. And so that is 0. So this is again something called an array, which is a collection of multiple elements, but this one has just 1. And so the element number 1 is called the number 0, in fact, in JavaScript. And so here we are taking that out and storing it into a new variable. And so now to start working in this function, let's take a look actually at this entry here. So in the console, basically. And so if we can see something in the console, then it means that our main code is already working. So especially these options that we specified here. Okay. So let's come to the console and let's reload. But I can already see something happening here. So here we get now the intersection ratio, which is basically 62%. All right, and we get is intersecting. So these are the 2 important values. So this first event here always happens no matter what. But now let's wait for it. And I will actually clear the output here. And so now as soon as we move out, so as soon as this section here moves out of the viewport, we should get a new event there, right? So let's wait for it, and there it is. So now the intersection ratio is 0, and is intersecting is false. All right, and so we now need to test for this, basically. So we will want this is intersecting to be equal to false. Okay, so let's write that. So if end, which is that event that we just saw, so it stands here for entry, dot is intersecting is equal to false, then we want to add our sticky class. So let's select the header here, and I will do it here all in one go this time, because actually we will have to change this in a minute. Yeah, right here. So document dot query selector, so dot header. And so before we always did it in a separate variable. So we stored this into a variable, and then on that variable we did the dot, right? But we can do it all in one go, so all directly. And so let's grab the class list, and then we want to add the sticky class here. So this time we are not using toggle, but instead simply adding it. So just called sticky. Now there is a better way of writing this. So instead of this, we would usually just this. All right, but I will actually leave it like this to make the code a little bit easier for you to understand. All right, and so this should actually, let's reload here once again. And, well, nothing happened. So, well, let's add these curly braces here to create a block of code so we can have multiple lines. And so I will only log this event here, so this entry, when this condition here is true. So in other words, when end.intersection or is intersecting is false. And actually, I think that I did this wrong here, is intersecting. So I think this is the correct name. Oh, and now it is actually already working. So let's see. So right now, nothing is happening. And actually, let's move this back out. Okay, so I did this here because I thought there was a bigger problem. All right, so here we already have our first entry, but it has this percentage and it is intersecting. And so now the sticky class is not yet being added, but let's wait for it. And there it is. Beautiful. Okay, now of course we don't have yet a way of removing it, but we will take care of that in a minute. Now what matters here is that we have this big jump. So watch closely what happens as the sticky class is added. So you will notice a big jump here in the page. So you saw that. So we basically skipped this entire part here. And the reason for that is basically what I explained to you before, which is the fact that this entire header here has now been taken out of the flow because it is now absolutely positioned. Okay, and so we need to fix that by basically compensating for this lost height and add some margin to the top of this header. So of this hero section actually. So here we now basically need to add exactly the same margin as is the original height of the header. So let's reload and let's get that height. So I will inspect it here. And you see that by default it is 96 pixels. So that's 9.6 rem. All right. And so now whenever the header class has been added, we want to add some margin to this one here. So a margin top to the section hero. All right. So let's do that here. Right here. And so how can we actually do that? So let's first write the code here, but of course it will not work yet. So margin top of 9.6 rem, but how does this relate now to the sticky class? I mean, we only want this to happen whenever basically the header has the sticky class, right? So let's make this here smaller. Right. So again, this style here should basically only apply whenever sticky is right here on the header, right? However, that is not possible because the header is not a parent of section hero. All right. And so instead, what we will have to do is to always add the sticky class not to the header, but to the body. All right. And so then we can do this. So we will then apply all these styles actually to the header, but only if the sticky class is a parent of it. So just like this. And so then this is exactly what we did multiple times before, and in particular with the mobile navigation. Right. So here we had this code where this style only applied to the main nav if the 𝗏𝗏𝗜𝗖𝗓 class was present on one of the parent elements. And so here we are doing the same. So we will apply all these styles here to the header if sticky is one of its parent elements. And so that will then be the body. And so here we can then do the same. All right. And finally, then in our JavaScript, we also need to add the sticky not to the header, but to the body. So that we do by saying document.body, and yeah, that's it. So just like this, and let's reload manually here. And let's see if there is the same jump now, but it shouldn't. And indeed, we fixed that. So beautiful. You saw the sticky class being added here. And so it then should have added, well, it added all these styles here to the header and then to the here to the section hero, it will have added that margin, right? So that margin top of 9.6. All right, so beautiful. And of course, if we take that sticky class away, then we go back to normal. So we are almost done here, just two more things. So first, let's take a look again at our effect. So you see, or you will see, now that of course this became sticky exactly as we moved out of the hero section, right? Now the problem with that is that it will then overlap this first section here. And so that means basically that this happens a little bit too late. So actually we want it to happen kind of like here. So exactly here. All right. So we can do that in our code. So here we can add a third option, which is the root margin. And so that margin is then basically applied outside of this root. So here we can say minus 80 pixels. So here it has to be pixels. It doesn't work to use percentages or rem. And it needs to be a string like this, so inside of quotes. And so here we use these 80 pixels because that's exactly what we set the height of the navigation bar to. So these 8 rem here are basically 80 pixels. And so this is the reason why it was important to set the height here manually. So that then right here, we could use that 80 pixels. And so let's reload just to make sure. With JavaScript, sometimes it's better to reload. And so now it should happen, yeah, exactly as we reached that. You saw it? So that is now almost it. And so now the only missing part is to remove it as soon as the hero is still visible. So once we enter this again, we should get another event. So I now exited the hero again, but now as we enter it, we will get a new event. And so now is intersecting is back to being true. Okay, and so we can use that to then remove it. So we can say is true, then remove. Okay, and now here this true is not necessary at all because basically this condition here, as soon as it is true, then this here will get executed. So this is not necessary, and that's also the reason why here we could set this. Because if this is false, then this one here will basically switch from false to true, and so therefore then this code here can execute. All right, but again I will leave it here like this for you to understand the code a little bit better. But anyway, again, reloading here. There it is, and there it leaves. And of course, now it is back up. So let's see that also in the code. So here, so now it is sticky, and now it's gone. And it's back, and it's gone. So working really nice. Let's just try it also in Safari, because things in Safari tend to work a little bit worse, but still, it is working perfectly. Very, very nice. So, as I said in the beginning, I know that this code here is quite tricky, but hopefully you were at least able to follow the logic of what I explained you here throughout this lecture. Because if you did that, then you might be able to adapt this in the future to your own page. And that is really the main goal that I have with these few videos here. All right, but enough talk because it works great. And so in the next video, we will create our last piece of JavaScript. Or actually, we will just use what we already have here because we now need to fix the flexbox gap property in Safari. So with the latest effects that we just implemented using JavaScript, we can now basically consider that the design and planning step of our project is finished. So what that means is that now we're ready to move on to the next step. And that next step is the test and optimize phase, which, remember, includes these points here. So just like we talked about before at the beginning of our 𝗦𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗬 project. And so over the next few lectures, we are going to talk about some of these points here. And starting in this one, we will talk about browser support. Now, browser support used to be a hugely important topic some years ago, but fortunately not so much anymore. But still, I think that it's worth taking a couple of minutes to talk about browser support now. And when I say browser support, what I mean is basically how different web browsers support different CSS properties. So back in the day, like some 10 years ago, there used to be a ton of inconsistencies between browsers. So our websites would look completely different in different browsers. And that was simply because some browsers didn't implement some of the modern properties that we were using at the time. Now those days are fortunately over, at least for the most important CSS properties, and if we consider that our users are usually using the latest browser versions. However, there will of course always be some users that are left behind using some very old browsers, like some old Internet Explorer, or are stuck on some older Safari version, and so there some of the things that we use on our website might not work as we intend. So to help us developers with that, there is a very handy tool that we can use to basically see how different CSS properties are supported by different browsers. So let's check that out. And it is called 𝗠𝗤𝗜𝗖𝗬.com. And so here we can input any CSS property that we want. And let's try, for example, one of the more modern things that we are using, which is CSS Grid. So let's try to see what the browser support is like for CSS Grid. And, well, we can see that all the modern browsers basically support it, of course. So Microsoft Edge, Firefox, all the way back to version 52, which was released all the way in 2017, you can see there. However, if some user still uses one of these old versions here, then they will not be able to basically see our layout. However, if one of our users is using this very old Firefox version here, then they will basically not be able to see anything that we did with CSS Grid. And so our layout will basically be non-existent to them, because we built our entire layout with CSS Grid, and if that doesn't exist, then all our elements will basically just appear one after another. Here we also have this older Microsoft Edge version, which was also released way back, and of course the even older Internet Explorers. So the Internet Explorers, they were always the very big problems for web designers and web developers. So supporting them used to be really a nightmare, and so we can be really glad that those days are over. All right, so right now basically the main browsers that matter to us are Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. And so if all the properties that we use are supported in these four browsers, then everything is fine, and they should also be supported on their mobile versions. So Safari on iOS supports basically the same thing as the regular Safari, and the same thing with Chrome for Android here. So these mobile browsers are also important to keep in mind, as more and more of the internet traffic is shifting to mobile. All right, and so up here we can see basically that CSS Grid is supported for around 95% of all users. And so that's quite good. And so therefore that's why we can right now choose to use CSS Grid without any problem. And the same is true for Flexbox. So here it has even better support at 98%. And if we added prefixing, then that would increase to almost 100%. Now, we didn't talk yet about what prefixing is. And so to talk about that, let me show you another example. So this is a CSS property that we haven't used yet. So backdrop filter, and this is quite a modern one where you see that, for example, Firefox is not even supporting it at all. Right? Now Chrome supports it without any problem, but then here you have this note here. And what that note, so this yellow thing here, means is that this property is only supported in Safari with the WebKit prefix. So let's actually try that out. So using this backdrop filter property. So let's go back here, and in our queries, let's go to our main nav here. So we will just use the property here, and I will then explain what it does. So backdrop filter, and then I'm going to use blur, and let's say 10 pixels. All right. So now here on our page, let's open this up and open navigation. Well, now we cannot really see anything. So let's actually make this here a bit darker. So a little bit less transparent, and maybe even more so. Let's make it just 50% transparent. And so let's turn that off and on again. And so you see now that basically the content that is behind this element is blurred, right? So let's inspect that. So where is that? Right here. So if I turn this off, then see what happens. So you saw that? Now it's no longer blurred. And with this, it is very nicely blurred. And this is a very modern and really, really cool effect that we can now create just using CSS. So again, backdrop filter basically simply blurs everything that is behind that element. All right, but here let's maybe adjust this a little bit more, maybe like this. And actually I will leave it here at 60%, and I will leave this one here on. All right, but now watch what happens in. Let's now tackle another item that was on the list for the test and optimize step, and that is to test the website performance using the Lighthouse tool. And the Lighthouse tool is basically an automated tool that we can use to improve the quality of our pages. And it was developed by Google, and therefore it is available here in our DevTools. So let's click Inspect here, and then all the way here at the end, you should have this tab which says Lighthouse. So let's give ourselves some more space, and then here we will want to turn on all the categories, maybe except Progressive Web App. And here we can then choose if we want to test on desktop or on mobile. So let's start with desktop and then generating the report. And this is going to take a little bit of time. So you see it does different things here, but that was actually pretty quick. So we got these 4 scores for these different categories. So our performance seems to be excellent. The accessibility has some things to improve, and also on the SEO, so search engine optimization. Now this performance here is not really indicative of the real truth, because for that we would actually need to test this once the website is deployed. And so we will run this test again once we do that in the last lecture here of the section. But for now, let's take a look at the results. And if everything is green, then that is perfect and you don't have much to fix. But anyway, let's take a quick look here at our results. And again, the results in performance, they are kind of skewed because we would have to test this once the website is actually deployed. because right now, of course, everything is very fast to load because the web page is still loading from our own computer. So we are still here on our local server, basically. And so therefore, everything is really, really fast. Okay. So here, what we need to do is basically to fix the image sizes. And so here we can see we can potentially save 1.4 seconds. And so that is what I mentioned also before. So way back in the design section, which is that it is very, very important to optimize images. So both in terms of the image dimensions and also of the actual size in kilobytes or even megabytes. So here we're talking about those sizes. So a big problem there. And here we're talking about the payloads. So basically that's the file size in terms of kilobytes. And in fact, our images are huge. And so that is something that we will need to fix soon. So not in this lecture, but in one of the next ones. Also, it tells us here that we should explicitly define the width and the height attributes on images, which is something that we did not do. And so all of this here is impacting our performance. Now, again, we will not fix that for now, but a bit later. Then in terms of accessibility, we passed a lot of things. So here we can see what we passed. So for example, let's see. So we have, of course, a title element here. The HTML has the length attribute. And so remember, that was important. So we set it here to English. And so that seems to be important for accessibility. Also here, image elements have alt attributes. So as I kept telling you throughout the course, we should never forget the alt attribute on images. And so that's why we passed the audit here. Then list items are contained within UL, so unordered list or ordered list. So again, that's something that we have been doing always. So yeah, so we passed most of the things there. But let's actually take a look at what we did not pass. So there are some issues apparently with color contrast ratio. So here our white text on our primary orange color apparently is not perfect. All right, but actually this test here does not really work that well. Because remember way back when we designed this hero section, we actually did change the color of this text here to give it a good contrast ratio with the background. So we already checked that this one here is actually okay. And so I'm not sure why the value appears here as not being okay. So what that means is that there are basically some errors in this section here of the Lighthouse test. So we can ignore this one here. Then here we already knew that this was an issue, but we had simply ignored it. Then again, this subheading. So here we actually even chose, again, let's add some space back. So here we did, again, actually choose the bit darker color just to make sure that the color becomes actually accessible. So really not sure why Lighthouse here tells us that it is not. Now this, of course, is not accessible, and again, we made that on purpose. Then the subheading again, and also, while this orange text on white apparently is also not so accessible. Let's just check that quickly. But well, I'm also not going to go back now and change everything. So you could do that, and if you're building a real website, then you should probably do that. And yeah, so that contrast ratio is not ideal, even though I really cannot see how this link here is hard to read. So right here, I mean, visually the contrast ratio looks just fine, but apparently with this algorithm, so with the algorithm that measures the color contrast, somehow it is just 2.85. So again, if you were building a real website, then probably you couldn't really use this orange brand color here. And well, you'd have to replace it, but I'm not going to do that. So yeah, let's check the next category here. So let's see what best practices we passed. Well, these are actually kind of independent of what we did. And let's take a quick look at search engine optimization. So remember how I said that for search engine optimization, to do it properly, you would need an entire course just for that. So I'm not going to go into that, but we will fix this meta description here. So that's something that we will do in the next lecture. So basically adding a short description that is then visible in Google and other search engines. All right, but we still did pass some things for search engine optimization, such as this viewport meta tag and some of this other stuff right here. Okay, so the accessibility things, I will leave them as they are, and then in the next lecture, I will fix that search engine optimization meta description. And then after that, we will optimize the images so that then we can finally launch our project to the internet. So deploy it on a live server. Let's now add the meta description that we were missing. And we're also going to add something called a favicon icon. And starting with the meta description, it's basically a short summary of our website's content. And it's also the text that will appear for each of the search results in Google and other search engines. So to add that to our page, we once again use the meta element. So meta again stands for metadata, which is essentially data that describes other data. And so this is the official way of adding metadata to HTML. So here we need to specify name and then description. And then the content. And so the content attribute here is where that summary of our content basically goes. So let's say that 𝗦𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗬 is an AI-powered food subscription that will make you eat healthy again 365 days per year. So we could have copied this text also from multiple places on our page, but I'm just writing it out here. That's probably a bit quicker. So it's tailored to your personal tastes and nutritional needs. All right, so this is the text that will appear in search engines. So that's quite important. And now let's actually also finally give our page a proper title. So just 𝗦𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗬 is a little bit poor here. So like this, it doesn't look really nice, right? So usually a page has something like a divider like this, like a dash or a colon or this vertical dash. And so let's do the same here. So I will add a dash using an HTML entity called m dash. And maybe we already did that before. And so this one looks like this. So it's simply just a bigger dash than just writing this. So let's say as a nice headline here, never cook again. And so indeed, that looks a little bit nicer here. Now, another thing that we are missing is something that all other pages also have usually, which is this icon here. So you see that each of these pages here has its own icon. And this icon is called the favicon icon. And so let's now create our own here for our page. So replacing basically that default icon here which looks really bad. So never just do that. Never leave this default icon without adding your own one. All right. Now here in our content, so in our images, we already have this fav icon right here. However, this one is huge, so 512 pixels, and it is 15 kilobytes. Now it is this big because we actually need multiple versions basically of this icon. So we need this icon here to be big for Android devices, and then we need some smaller versions for displaying it in the browser as a fav icon, and also for something else on iOS. But first, let's start with the fav icon for browsers. So I'm going to open the folder that we are currently working in. So that's this one here. And then I'm going to open this image here like this. So on the Mac, it is very easy to resize the images, while on Windows, I'm not sure how it works. So if you're on Windows, you probably need to download some application that you can use to resize images. Okay? And if you don't want to do that, you can simply take the final images out of the final course files. All right. But I will just do that here very quickly. And actually, we should copy it first. So you see it's already called favicon.png. But let me copy that here so I can keep the original. So again, markup. And once again, if you are on Windows, you can just download some other software, or you can simply take the final files. So I will resize this one to maybe 64 pixels. And so then you see it's only 3 kilobyte. So that's a lot better. All right. And let's close this and come back here. And we will then use this one here in a minute. So somewhere here in the header again, let's now add that fav icon. So we could probably do that anywhere, but I like to do it here after the meta tags. So basically close to the styles, because to include the fav icon, we actually also use the link element. So link again, but now the rel attribute here is icon. And then also the href property. And so here, basically defining the path to that favicon file. So that's at image.favicon.png. Then let's close this. And of course, outside here. Okay, and that should be it. And indeed, there is our fav icon. And so this looks a lot better than before now. It gives our page a really nice and important touch here. So if you see now the other tabs here open besides this, then this one looks just like any other regular website, right? So really, really cool. But actually we are not done here yet. So we are done with the browser part, but there are actually ways of adding a website basically as a favorite to iOS devices and also to Android devices. So I'm not sure if you have ever done that and how many users do this, but there is actually an option on both these operating systems that we can basically add a website to the home screen. And so for that, we will need to provide a special icon. So let's do that. And starting with iOS. So here rel is Apple touch icon. And then as always the href. And so let's now create that icon. So we have this one. Let's copy it again because we will need it again actually. So let's call this Apple touch icon. And then let's also do the ones for Android. So on Android, we need actually two. So let me copy it again. So copy paste. And also we need to change the dimension here. So markup, and this should be 180. So that's kind of a hard rule here for the Apple one. And then for Android, we need one with 192 and one with 512. So let's call this one 𝗑_icon 192 and 𝗑_icon 512. So this one is already 512, right? And so we just need to resize this one to be 192. All right. And you might think that all this is a lot of work and not really necessary, but if you want to make your website perfect for all users, then you need to do this. And like real design studios, they of course go through all these steps. So it's nice that you know already how things like this work. So Apple Touch icon. And again, we will not really be able to test this now because, well, we don't have an iPhone handy here on the screen, right? Now, for the Android devices, it actually works a little bit differently. So for Android, we will need to create a brand new file right here, basically in the home folder. And that file is going to be called manifest.webmanifest. And so this is kind of a file extension that is used for Android to recognize different 𝗑 icons, basically. So here, let's just write this. So simply copy what I'm doing here. So icons, then colon, and then the square brackets, and then creating another object, which is what this is called. So then source, and of course you will not know all of this by heart. So this is something that you copy from somewhere. And even right now, I am copying this from somewhere else. So I don't know this by heart. Obviously, that would be a little bit too much. So anyway, for the source, we have to move into our image folder. Here we don't need this slash actually. And then I think it was called 𝗑_icon 192.png. And yeah, so VS Code recognizes it immediately. Then we also need to specify the type, which is image/png, and also the sizes. So 192 by 192. Okay, so that's the first one. And now let's simply copy this line, add a comma here. And now the other one is the 512. And so 512 times 512. All right, so that's it for this one. And now here we just need to reference that. So adding another link element, URL is now manifest, and the href is, well, manifest.webmanifest. And there we go. That's it. Well, except for closing this one here. Yeah, but now that is correct. And so with this, we added the right 𝗑 icons basically for all platforms. So this one here works for the browser. This one here works for adding the website as an icon to the iOS home screen. And then the manifest here works for doing the same, but on Android. All right. And so we're almost done here building and optimizing our page. Now all we have to do next is to optimize our images in the next lecture. In this lecture, I'm finally going to show you how we can and should optimize our images, both in terms of the image dimensions and also of the actual file size in terms of kilobytes. Now, actually, I already did most of the image optimizations here so that we don't waste too much time. So let me just show you what I did on some images so that then after that, we can together optimize this big hero image here. So let's take, for example, these ones here. So these application screens. So right now here, they are at the biggest size that they will ever be, right? So as we scale the layout down, the images will only get smaller. And so it's important that we do this analysis at the biggest size that the image will ever be. Okay. Now, anyway, the image right now occupies a width of 187 pixels. So that's what we can see up here above the image, right? Now, remember the lecture about images from way back in the design section. So back then I told you that the actual image size, so of the image file itself, should always be double of the size that is actually displayed on the screen, right? So hopefully you remember that, and if not, then you can always go back and check out that part of the lecture. So just as a quick summary, the reason why we need an image that is double the size than is actually displayed on the screen is that these high density screens actually need 2 pixels of the image to display 1 pixel in the design, so in the layout. So again, I explained that before. Now, anyway, the actual image size, we can get it by hovering here over the image. And so you see the intrinsic size is 400 by 809, and the rendered size, again, is 188 by 379. So the intrinsic size, so the actual size of the image, is 400, basically because I rounded this 188 here to 200, and then I made the image itself double of that. All right? So basically the process is this. We start with a really big image, if we have it. So in this case, it was probably like 1000 pixels or so wide. And then when I finished the design, I checked out the largest width that the image will ever have. And so that's, again, these 188 pixels here. And then I rounded that to 200 and then doubled that to 400. And so then I went ahead and resized the image to have a width of just 400 pixels. All right. And so with that, I finished the first step of the optimization process. So the part that is about the image dimensions. And the same, for example, here. So let's inspect that. And so you see that the intrinsic size is 700. And so that's because I rounded this rendered size here to 350, which double makes 700. Okay. Now, where I did not do that is on this one. So here in our hero image. So let's inspect that as well. And so here, the intrinsic size, so the actual size of the image is 1400, so almost 1500, but the width that has been rendered is only 570 pixels. So we now need to resize this image as a first step. So let's round this to 600 and make the image then 1200 pixels wide. Okay, so let's come here again to these files. And once again, you will need some program to resize images. So make sure to download that. Or of course, you can, as always, just use the file from the final files. So as I said, the width should just be 1200. And so that is only 80% of the beginning. So it was 2.9 megabyte, and now it will be only 1.9. And so that's already a nice saving. So I saved it, and this should now have been reloaded. And of course, it looks exactly the same. But now you see that the intrinsic size is just 1200 pixels. All right. So that was important, but that's only half of the things that we need to do. So the other half is to actually compress now the image in order to actually reduce the file size. Because as you saw here, it still has 2 megabytes, which is way too much. So that's not really acceptable. And in fact, we can check out the entire size of the page, basically, by coming here to the network tab and then reloading. So you see that it transferred 3.9 megabyte. And so again, that's way too much. Okay, so the tool that we can use to compress images is called Squoosh. So that's 𝗬𝗏𝗜𝗖𝗬, right? And so here we can, well, there are different ways. Let's just do this way here. So selecting our image. And so now it is compressing here. All right, so here on the left side, we have our original image. And then on the right side, we have a compressed version of that. Now, right here, it is using the JPEG format, which is not going to work. Because with JPEG, we cannot have basically transparent parts of the image. So you see that now here, the image turned black, where in the original, it is transparent. And the same down here. So with JPEG, we could compress it a lot down to 125 kilobytes, but then we would lose the transparency. So let's try here browser PNG. And so that doesn't really work. So here we don't have a lot of compression. So let's try this oxy PNG. And so that is doing something here. Okay, and it did reduce it 15%. So let's try to increase that here to 3, this effort. See if that changes anything. Well, not really. So here we then have to play around a little bit with these different options that we get for each of the image files. So that doesn't change anything at all. So let's try this one here, reducing the palette. And so now indeed that went down by a lot. But let's see what that compression cost us. So you see that here her face, for example, is a lot worse than it was before. Right? And the entire image does look a lot worse when we compare it with the original one. Let's try again with the normal PNG. So there it doesn't compress a lot. So here we still have 124, and it still doesn't look so nice. So let's try this one here again. And I'm not sure if this is going to work, actually. But still, let's try this one. So I will download it by clicking this button. Okay, and there it is. And then I will put it right here. So let's say keep both. And then I will change the name here. So hero min. Okay. And then let's just try to replace that here and see how it looks like. So that's right here. Okay. And well, you see that the size of the page is now a lot less, but the image does also not look so great anymore. I mean, it's still okay, but it's not as good as before. So we can actually do something else, and something which is much better, which is to, instead of using PNG, we can use a very new and modern image format called WebP. So let's try WebP, and out of the box, immediately we get a compression of 95%. Right. Now, if we check it out here, then this doesn't look really good. So let's increase the quality here just a little bit. All right, that's still not perfect. So what if we gave it 100% quality? Well, that's still not so great. Let's try lossless here, maybe. Well, that doesn't look really lossless to me. Let's try to decrease this even further. And so here it's now a game, basically, of finding the right balance between the image quality and the compression. So lossless doesn't really work. So let's again try a quality of 100. But that doesn't seem to change the image here a lot. So this doesn't really look so nice. Maybe if we try to increase the effort, or probably even better would be to reduce the palette. Okay, so now actually it looks really, really good. So I'm not that worried, as you can see, over these two other images, but this one here is the most important because it's the most prominent one. So 400 kilobyte is still a lot. So let's try to put it back down to 70 something. And yeah, beautiful. Just 100 kilobyte. But now it is back to being this blurred. Let's try something like this. So again, finding the right balance here. That's still not perfect. All right. But now I'm actually satisfied. Now I just want to get it like below 200. Let's try this here maybe. All right. So this looks good while having a really good size here of 200 kilobytes. And so let's download it like this. Okay. So 𝗤𝗛𝗜𝗖𝗐. And now let's include that here. But actually, let me copy this, comment this one out, put this here. So 𝗤𝗛𝗜𝗖𝗐. So let's see our page. And indeed, here it is. Let's try that again. For some reason now this bottom part is no longer visible. Well, anyway, let's just inspect this here. And yeah, so this is the one that we just created. And here this image looks beautiful, right? We cannot really see that it has been compressed, but well, we reduced the file size in 90%. However, there is one problem with this. So we cannot leave it like this and call it a day. That would be too easy. So let's come back here to can I use, and let's write 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗐 here, because that's just another thing that we can check out how it is supported in browsers. And so here you can see that Safari has partial support. So you can see that down here, which means that it is only available on macOS 11. On mobile Safari, it does actually work, but not on iOS 13, which was released only 2 years ago. And the same for these a little bit older Firefox, which also is from 2018, so not all too long ago. So right now our image will not be displayed in some browsers, and that is really bad, right? We don't want that to happen at all. So there's something we can do about that, fortunately. And so here, let me show you how we can use a really nice trick with HTML. So here, instead of using image, or at least outside of the image, we will create a picture. All right. And it doesn't need any class, doesn't need anything really. And so here we will now define the two possible images that we have. So we have our 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗐 hero image, and we also have the compressed PNG that we created before. So let's define the source element here, and then with the source set attribute. So just like this. And here let's define first the 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗐, for example. And then we also tell the browser that this image is of the type, or that this file is of the type image 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗐. Because here we could actually also define videos, for example. So this is one of them. Let's duplicate it. And then 𝗤𝗛𝗜𝗖𝗐𝗏.png. And this one is image/png. Okay. And so now what's going to happen is that the browser will basically select which of these two images here it can display the best. So for those browsers who cannot display the 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗐, so this one, it will simply then select this one. But if the browser is able to render 𝗬𝗜𝗖𝗏, which is most of the browsers, then it will choose this one and render it. Now, where will the browser actually render it? Well, basically inside of this image. So we still need the image. So let me cut it from here, remove all that, and then paste it here. All right. So we will still have the class here on this image. So we are styling the image, and we're also providing the alt text on this image. But the browser will then basically simply replace whatever source we have here with one of these two. Okay. And here actually we want the fallback. So basically the one that will be displayed in case that the browser does not understand the source elements, because this is also something a bit newer. All right. So again, here is the fallback, which means basically the version that all browsers should be able to render. And so, yeah, this is how we can select basically two different images here and let the browser decide which one works best. So let's see. And indeed, everything works beautifully here. Let's again inspect that. And so if we now hover over this image source, so you see it says 𝗤𝗏𝗜𝗖𝗐, but if we hover over it, then you see that the current source is still 𝗤𝗏.webp. And so that's exactly what I explained before. So it's the browser basically only selecting this one and only downloading this image and then replacing that source here. All right. And that is how we can use a high-performing image format like WebP to be able to really compress down images while maintaining their quality. All right. And that's, of course, especially important for big images like this one, who take up a lot of space. So please don't neglect this part when you're building your own websites. So compressing images is really something that you must do for your users. Okay, and with this, I now finally consider our website complete and finished and ready to be launched to the internet. And so that's exactly what we're going to do in the next lecture. All right, so the moment has finally come where we can launch our project and deploy it to a live server on the internet. So let me show you how we can do that so that you can share your project with all your friends and tell them that you built this project by hand with your new skills. Now, there are countless web hosting providers out there, and maybe you already have some kind of shared web hosting with some cPanel going on. And so if you have that, then go ahead and deploy your website there. Maybe you even know already how to use FTP, and then you can do all that. However, here in this lecture, I will recommend a very nice and free service called Netlify. So let's write that here. So netlify.com. Now, I'm not affiliated with Netlify in any way, so they do not pay me to tell you that this is the best service. It simply is the one that I love to use and that I use all the time, and where I have all of my projects personally as well. Okay, so basically this is just a service that you can sign up for, and they will then host your website for free up until a certain point. So if you start to get more and more users, or if the website is really big, then at some point you will have to pay, but the free plan is very generous. And so that's why I love to recommend this application and this service. So I use it for myself also. So if you're convinced about this, then just go ahead and sign up right here. Right? And of course, I already do that. So just pause the video here while you sign up. And then once you're done, just come back here. Okay, so hopefully you signed up for the service here. And then once you open up the application, it should look something like this. Now, they actually change the layout here all the time. And so by the time you're watching this, probably it will look different. But what you need to do is to find some link that says sites. So right here, and then all the way at the end, at least that's how it works now, you find this field here. So here is where you can drag and drop a site folder and it will then get deployed. Now the favorite option here would be to use something called Git. So that is version control. But for that you would need to learn a lot more. And so let's not do that, because we can also very simply just drag and drop our folder here. So let's do that again here. And so yeah, this is the folder here. So the one that we have been working on. And so this is the final code of our website. And in your case, you just, wherever you are in your file system, just take the folder that you have been working on and then drag and drop it into this area. All right, so it's uploading. So that's taking some time, and that's actually it. So it has been deployed, and it has this URL right here. So when I click this now, then this is now actually a live version of this website living on the internet. So congratulations for having now your very first site deployed to the internet. So great job. That's really well done. And I hope a great achievement for you. Now the URL here is basically composed of these random words. So let's change that. So we can change that here at the site settings. And again, by the time you're watching this, it might be different. But somewhere you will have to find some option to change the site name. So I just click here, and then we can basically change the URL. So I can try 𝗦𝗤𝗜𝗖𝗓 here, which probably is already taken. Exactly. So let's say dash my name. So 𝗦𝗤𝗜𝗖𝗓-Jonas. And yeah, that is still free. And so now our website, or at least my website, is at 𝗦𝗤𝗜𝗖𝗓-Jonas.netlify.app. So basically you have this subdomain on netlify.app. Now, if you wanted to have a real domain, so not just this subdomain on netlify.app, for example, if you wanted 𝗦𝗤𝗜𝗖𝗓.com, then you would have to purchase a domain for yourself and point that domain to this website. And that you can do on something like GoDaddy or Hover. So personally, I use this one, hover.com. And once again, they are not paying me to say this. It is just where I have all of my domains. All right. Then you can point your domain here, but that's a little bit out of the scope here. So you could do that here at domain management. And here then you will have all the instructions for doing that. All right. But just to show the site to your friends or to your family, this is more than enough. Because now you can actually take this link and share it with your friends, like on social media or some messaging apps, right? And then they will be able, of course, to see your masterpiece. And you will be able to tell them that you built this completely by hand. Okay, now let's just inspect this here, because as I mentioned before, I actually want to run the lighthouse test again. So now we have it deployed on a real website, and so now maybe that performance result will be a little bit different. So just run that here again, but hopefully with the optimizations that we did, we still will get a good result. So in fact, we got 99. So that's great, that's almost perfect, and the same here for accessibility. And here we did get perfect scores. Now, of course, this is not enough to say that our site is perfect. So this is just an automated tool, but still, it's nice to have these metrics here with these great values. Now let's just see here on the performance. So our first contentful paint is really small, which is quite important. Yeah, and here the issue is just the properly sized image. So the gallery here, they apparently might be a little bit smaller, but that's well, the same thing here, but yeah, those are not going to save so much. And as I said, I did not compress these because I didn't want to waste too much time there. All right, great. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that this actually comes with HTTPS. So by default, you get an HTTPC certificate that Netlify will then basically update for you every couple of months so that your site will stay secure forever. All right, and so now we are basically done. There's just one more thing that I want to do, which is to use the power of Netlify to now also make the form that we have on our website work. So that's something that I said I would leave for the end of the course. And so now in the next lecture, it is finally time to do that. So the last thing that we're going to do here is to use the Netlify Forms feature in order to make our sign up form work. So here in the menu of your site, so right now, remember our site, or mine here, is called 𝗦𝗣𝗖𝗀. And so right now we are in the site settings, but here we have all these other things. And one of them is forms, right? So here we see that we can manage forms and submissions without any server-side code or any JavaScript. And so that's what I mentioned also way back, which is that usually we need some code on some backend server side, basically, to then receive form submissions. But here, a Netlify can basically do that job for us. So all we need to do is to add a name to the form like this and add the Netlify attribute. And that will be it. All right. And of course, this will only work if you deployed your site using Netlify. Right, but that's pretty obvious, I guess. But anyway, here is our form. So the action we don't need in this case, but instead we need a name. So the name attribute on the form, let's call it sign up, and then the Netlify attribute. So this is of course not a standard HTML attribute, but simply when we upload the file, Netlify will then see that we added it and will then automatically start accepting submissions for this form. Now, in order to make this work, we also need to add a name attribute to each of these input fields. And the name attribute is actually a standard HTML attribute for form inputs. So actually we should have done that earlier, because even when we write our own server-side code to accept the form submission, we still need that name, because that is how we will then identify each of the input fields. So let's call this one here full name. So let's give them here descriptive names, because these names are actually what are going to appear in the Netlify dashboard. So here, well, here we can simply call it email as well. And yeah, here let's also just give it the name with the same description as the ID. So name, just like this. Okay, and that's actually it. Now, just one important piece of advice here is that you should never use a Netlify form to handle real signups with passwords, or the same thing for logins. So Netlify has actually a separate feature for that, but that is paid and I did never use it. But you cannot, or you should really not submit passwords through this. All right, so really just something like a contact form or something around those lines. All right, but anyway, we just prepared our form here, and now we of course need to deploy this one more time. So we need to submit the code basically again, and so for that we come here to deploys, and then here we have again that area where we can simply drop our folder. So let's do that again. And so you see that now we have a new deployment going on. So it's still uploading. It's not done yet. So let's wait for it. Well, that's taking a bit too long. That's strange. So actually it is already done. All right. Now our form here will still look the same, of course, but if we inspect it, then that attribute should be there. So actually it is not. And so what that means is that Netlify did already change our HTML here a bit. So you see that even this method here of post, I think that we don't have it in our code. So, right, you see that. So we don't have method post. And so Netlify, they added this part here. Okay, and so now let's try to fill this with something. Let's try my email here. And finally, then let's say YouTube video. So sign up now. And well, Netlify then takes us to this thank you message. And we could also customize this. So basically lead the user to our own custom page. But well, that's just too much work for now. So we can just go back. And now in our Netlify dashboard, that submission should be here in forms. And indeed, here we get active forms, which is called sign up, which is exactly the name that we gave it here. And so if you had multiple forms on your page, then you would of course have to give them different name. But anyway, let's now click here, and then we will get that submission that we just made. So you see, we have the full name that I created, the email, and also where did you hear from us. So Netlify even takes this text here from our labels, which is really, really helpful. Right, so you can then also download these results as a CSV file. But just one thing that I wanted to make clear here is that you can only take 100 submissions per month on this form. So what that means is that if you have a lot of traffic, then at some point you might have to sign up for a paid plan if you want to keep using the form. And if you want to get all the form submissions right here into Netlify. Okay, but if you just have a couple of visitors and just want to use this, let's say for fun, then you can use the free version still and get up until 100 submissions. And as you see, this is really, really easy to do and can become quite handy. All right, and with this, let's now close it up because now our project is indeed finished. There's nothing more we can or we should do. And yeah, so we've come a really long way here together, and I hope that you're just as happy as I am with how this project ended up. So congratulations once more, and of course make sure to share this with all your friends and make them maybe a little bit jealous. So anyway, take care, and I see you next time.